Would you join me in welcoming Kate Rankin back?
Good morning, everyone. That was such a nice way to ground us. Thank you, Michelle. So I realized that many of you might not have been here last week, and I want to spend just a moment introducing myself. My name's Kate Rankin. I've been part of First Pres for 13, 14 years. I'm actually a psychologist by training, and I went to Fuller Seminary back in the day and did a degree in theology there. And I have to say, for me, anything that combines spirituality and psychology is like my happy place. I love that stuff. So this sort of thing, Stages of Faith, has always been so interesting to me. And it happens to be that this particular, out of all the theories, this particular one, the early version of this book is the one that I loved the most 20 years ago. And I have, gone through this and thought about this for a long, long time. I have taught it at other churches, but this has just been a big part of my life. So when the Christian formation team decided this was what they really wanted First Pres to do, and this was actually the book they chose, I had nothing to do with it. It was really a great synergy that God sort of said, okay, let's pull this together. So I'm going to be speaking about this today. But I wanted to start out, and the other thing I want to warn you all is, we have a technical problem. My slide advancer has broken, so I'm unfortunately going to need to keep telling Janet in the back to advance slides. Sorry about that. So that'll throw me off a bit. So just so you know, what I'll do, since many of you weren't here, I'll spend 5 minutes reviewing what we talked about last week, and then we're going to dive into the new material. And the first thing is we're going to look at the shape of our spiritual development, just to do some reminders. We're going to do a deeper dive, and then we're going to have a little bit of small group discussion time. So Janet, go ahead and you can advance. So one of the things that's important that we talked about last week is that some of you might be thinking that I'm going to lay out a nice map of your spiritual development today that you can just follow like a project plan. And I just want to emphasize that is not the way this works. Back. Backwards. Yes, I was just going to say, this is what we think it's going to be. This is what we say, the map that I'm giving you today. That we expect that our spiritual development is going to be this way. And we think that if we work really hard, it'll be even more accelerated. And that is not true. As you saw on the next slide, this is what really happens. The real journey is something that is God's mysterious unfolding of his narrative for us. We are all different. We all have a completely different process. In the stages of faith, it's normal to stay at a stage for decades, to move back and forth between stages, to be at multiple stages at once. It is completely an organic process. So that's an important thing to hold in mind as we talk about this. Go ahead. Yeah, so the other next important thing that we talked about last time is that God is doing this, not us. We spent a little bit of time sort of thinking about what that means, but it's probably the most important thing that you walk out the door with today. Just remember, this is not something that we learn and do. We don't even have to understand a bit of this to participate fully in the process that God has for us. And I think the great analogy that we could use is that God is the gardener and we're the plant. We may not even understand what's happening, but he's making it happen and moving us through. And the church can be considered a trellis. There are many trellises in our lives, but the church is committed to coming alongside of us and helping us on our journey. And then another piece that I wanted to mention from last time, we talked a little bit about the fact that some of you might be a little worried. We're talking about stages of faith. We're identifying how each of us has a different stage and we're all different from each other. That can be a little threatening. That can feel like, well, isn't that going to divide us rather than unite us? And I think that's the right question to ask. I think humans tend to be worried about differences and try to compare. But the important thing for us to remember is if we submit to what God is doing, God's process is very different. He loves differences. He wants us all to be richly, fully different and richly, fully integrated. The body of Christ is a great way for that to happen. If we all have different skills, if we all are at different stages, it means we're a healthier church. It means we're a healthier community. We have to acknowledge and accept those differences and our own unique specificity. But in that context, this is a good thing. So, and then the last thing we talked about last week was, so if God is in charge and we're not, then what do we do? You know, why are we even talking about this? And I think that one of the things is, I think God likes it when we learn more about what he's up to and can see it and share it with him. But I think another thing that we've been focusing on as a church is that spiritual disciplines are a way for us to participate in this process. And we are really committed to making it more easy and possible for you to join into spiritual disciplines together and to find the spiritual disciplines that are right for you. This opens space for God to move in our lives and help us to develop. So I wanted to also review from last week just the way the stages work. There are 6 of them, and we like to think about each one of them having a particular almost superpower, where there's just something particular about that phase that everyone, no matter whether you've already been through that phase or not, can benefit from that. And another thing that as I said before, the stages flow differently for everyone. You can be at more than one stage. More than one stage can feel like home. And the other thing about this is we can understand our own stages and the stages we've been through, and we can maybe get the gist for a stage ahead of us, but we really do not understand the stages that are beyond that, you know, and we have to have a sense of humility as we approach this and think about this as a community. You might be interacting with somebody and you think they're way behind you and they're way ahead of you. so we just have to be really accepting and compassionate with people we're interacting with for many reasons. But so we really, it's a very complicated journey that we're on. So go ahead with the next slide. So I wanted to also quickly review cages. So each of the stages, we have the possibility of getting stuck. A journey implies movement. We're always moving. We might stop and, you know, spend some time with friends or take in a view, and so there might be some slowing and some, but sometimes we get bogged down, we get stuck, and we don't even want to get unstuck. We're really happy in that stuck place. And maybe we don't even realize that we're stuck. Sometimes other people see it better than we do. But I think that one of the things that we really want to make sure happens is that we all can have compassion with other people around us who are stuck. And I'll talk a little bit today about some of the cages that we have. Last week we did stages 1 and 2. Today we're going to be doing stages 3 through 6. I just want to, in one slide each, review for you what 1 and 2 are. So go ahead. So stage 1, quick review. The way to think about this is it's the initial kind of recognition of God. The superpower here is awe. We talked about this a little bit last week, how powerful just being in awe is. It's amazing to be able to really recognize that there are things beyond us that are huge and beautiful and beyond anything that we could have imagined or created. That sense of something greater is the foundation of faith. And folks in this phase are enjoying that a lot, and we can gain that from them. Another thing that's important, so stage 2, I guess we're doing stage 2. This is going to be the awkward thing about the slide advancing. It's going to be a little bit off of my talk, and I guess that's the way it's going to go today. God is kind of doing his own thing. So the life of discipleship is stage 2, and this is where instead of kind of being on an isolated spiritual trek, figuring things out yourself, you start to get together with a group of people that share that belief system you're starting to learn about. And the key superpower of this is zeal. You are engaged and invested in learning. You know that you don't know everything, but you're so excited that you're with other people who can actually help you understand these things and start to help you make sense of the spiritual world. And there's a lot of passion and energy. I said last week, I used to do like 2-3 Bible studies a week when I was in this phase. I just couldn't get enough. And so that's the superpower in this phase. So, and then I'm going to actually switch to talking about the deeper view of the stages now. So one of the things that I want to say to orient us as we start to go deeper is that there is way too much material for me to possibly talk about all of it today. This is just an overview. What I've done is I've made the details available to you in packets. You do not even have to look at the packets today if you don't want to. You can or might not. I'm not going to go into depth on a lot of these. What I'm going to do instead is instead of like telling you all the information, I'm going to just illustrate the stages. And I think we all need to just be able to get the gist for what they are and then use the materials later on your own study or in other places. It's just the beginning of how our church is going to be using this. So now let me see how far. I'm way behind because we started late too, so it's just the way it's going to go. So first stage we want to look at is stage 3. This, the key to this is the productive life, is what the authors call it. And faith is about working for God. So we said in stage 2 that the dominant feeling is you're sort of starting on the outside and moving in as you're getting to know the belief system and getting to know the community and how things work. And there's always this sense in stage 2 that you're trying to gain mastery to go and belong on the inside. But in stage 3, you know you've arrived. You actually know what you're talking about. It works for you. You actually feel like you're one of the people in the community that's helping define what's happening. And there's a huge sense of responsibility. So I actually want to show the tree. Can we go back just one moment? So the reason I chose this picture for this is because it's a picture of a fruit tree. Obviously, this tree is really bringing forth life, right? It's giving to it, those around can enjoy the fruit. This is a wonderful symbol for what stage 3 feels like and looks like on the outside. So go ahead, we can advance. Thank you. So for a lot of people, this part where they're taking responsibility it feels really good. It feels like almost a peak experience in their faith because they feel like they know what they're doing. We feel like we know what we're doing, and we feel like we're doing things right. There's a feeling of that. One of the things that's important about this is the internal sense is we're engaged and we feel like we want to take care of the group. And on a lot of people, this actually looks like stepping out and taking responsibility and maybe running a program. But not everyone can run a program, right? For many of us, it's something a little bit more invisible. I've been in churches where I know certain people really have taken a personal responsibility to see when there are new people in the church, anybody who comes in that looks like a new person, and they just make sure that person feels welcome and make sure that person feels connected. And I think we can all see that that's just as much of an important ministry in holding the community together and building up the church as running the nursery or running some other program. So these are all things that stage 3 folks are doing in our church, and there's a real value. So go ahead and advance, thanks. So another thing that's important about this is we start to recognize our call and live out in it. Sometimes that takes some risk for us to do that, but it's part of what feels good about this stage. We feel empowered to do what we're good at. We see it and we start to do it. But I want to point out that for a subset of people, this stage can be painful, particularly if their church doesn't let them express those gifts. And I think, there are lots of ways that this happens historically. Sometimes women have been kept from expressing the particular gifting that they have. And this can actually be very painful for somebody in this phase that knows they have a gift but can't use it. I think for a healthy church, we have to have humility and be open to how God wants to empower individual members to serve. And I think that any church that tries to prescribe or block that is less healthy. In my case, when I was in high school, my big Presbyterian church in Ohio invited me to be a deacon. Every church I've been to since then is scandalized by that. They were like, "You're a deacon in high school? How could you possibly?" But my experience of that was it was actually just right. I was a known entity at my church. I was a leader in my youth group. I was clearly under a lot of spiritual guidance, and in my church, the deacons were really service-oriented. They were very outward, and that was just right for me at that phase. I wanted to serve. I was used to taking responsibility. For 2 years, I managed the distribution of flowers out of the service and out of Easter and Christmas, and it was great. And I remember sitting in that the leadership, the deacons meeting, and just feeling so honored and so special that I could be a part of the church in that way. And it was a wonderful experience. It probably influenced my choices later to go to seminary. But I just feel that a church can really be sure to pay attention to all the gifting of all the members and try not to exclude anybody, no matter how young or any other feature. So We place value on symbols. There's a lot of external obviousness about this. And for some people, they're a little more introverted about this. And it's really learning a belief system to the point where you can switch from being the learner to the teacher. So for some people, they become a teacher of what they believe, and that's how they move into stage 3. So just when I look back at my life, I have to say, I think I got to stage 3 pretty quickly as a Christian because it's just part of my personality to serve and apply my gifts, but I never really felt done with the stage 2 learning. So just as an example, I feel like I was kind of in stage 2, stage 3, kind of at the same time for a long period. And I think that that's a great example of how we can revisit and be working through elements of the stages. We can be doing multiple things at once, and any previous stage we can revisit. So quickly, the ways that we get caged at stage 3, we can be overly zealous. And I want to point out, we said zeal was the superpower at stage 2, so how is it a problem at stage 3? Well, it's a little bit of a different characteristic, right? We actually can get a bragging or controlling character to our zeal here, where we're trying to basically, we need others to believe what we believe, or we need them to do what we need them to do, and it's very ego-driven, and it's really something where we're not allowing people to be what they need to be. So there's a different nature to the zeal. The other thing that happens is we often burn out at this phase. And after a certain time, we start to, it's characteristic that we're serving out of our own power and are having less of an ability to really serve out of what God is doing. We think we're doing what God is doing, but at the same time, our discernment isn't quite developed enough, and we can be investing a lot of time and energy into things that don't come to fruit, and it makes us burn out. So that's common to be caged at that point. We can be self-centered. Anytime you think you're indispensable, that might be a sign of a cage. And we might actually feel like we're performing, like look at all the things I'm doing, but no one sees what's really inside. No one really sees my complexity and my doubts, and we can feel resentful of that. So those are some of the cages at stage 3. Go ahead with the next slide, thanks. So moving from stage 3 to stage 4, transitioning. This is where it gets interesting, because if you've heard what I've said, stage 3 feels really good, and we feel empowered. We feel like we're doing the right thing, and we've got it all, got the answers. No one really voluntarily moves out of stage 3. This is where, we were only halfway through, right? So this is where God starts to really make some things happen that don't always make us feel that comfortable. Actually, they make us feel quite uncomfortable. We lose our sense of certainty. We need to experience faith crises and personal crises. We may feel abandoned. We're trying to find direction, even though we thought we had the answer. Suddenly we're realizing we don't. That's what happens when we're transitioning from 3 to 4. And so we actually have to let go of success and accept vulnerability. Now, this is one of those things where we don't do it, God does it. And let me explain as we go to stage 4. Here's the picture of stage 4. This is quite a difference from the previous picture, right? I mean, we look at this, is this tree dead? I think every winter, if you've lived in a Midwestern or some place that actually has deciduous trees, you look at a tree and there's not one sign of green life on the outside. And there's this little fear, like you've seen it come back before, you know spring will come, but there's a fear that it really won't. Maybe this particular tree is dead. And that's a great visual for what this stage feels like and looks like. The other important thing about this is this tree is alive and it has a root system that's continuing to grow invisible to us. And that's what this stage of faith is about. Some of the quotes I gave folks last week of people in this stage, one person described it as, I have this old saying that fits right now. Just when I got it all together, I forgot where I put it. That's how I feel about my spiritual life. So in stage 3, our faith felt like it was working, that we knew what to do and we knew how to express it in our communities. In stage 4, those answers don't quite fit and don't quite work for our situations anymore. I think the way that we should think about this, if we're using plants as an analogy for ourselves, what's happening here is we're becoming root-bound. We're in a particular pot. Stage 3 and stage 2 kind of created a pot for us. And as our roots are growing, we're actually a victim of our own growth and flourishing. We get to a point where our roots kind of need to go beyond the boundaries. And this is a very uncomfortable process, but it's also healthy and normal. I think that the stage doesn't always happen to everyone because it is so scary. Actually, to get to the point where you start to let go of some of the things you're sure of and start to question them, and there are many pieces of this that are scary. I only felt safe enough to enter into this phase when I was in seminary. I literally resisted it, and by the time I got to seminary, I was like, okay, this is enough of a box, a container for me that has the outward manifestation of the faith that I have espoused, that now I can actually go inward and start really grappling. And a lot of folks never feel like they're safe enough to do this. So go ahead and show the next slide. So one of the things, the real superpower here is this developing sense of personal integrity, where you want your internal thought life and behavior to be consistent between you and God. There's this sense of feeling that it's not quite enough or not quite right, and you're searching for that integrity, and you're being really honest with yourself as you're doing it. We start to recognize the God-shaped vacuum that Pascal talks about, but we have we're aware of it every day, but we have a really deep confusion about how it's supposed to be filled. And we end up literally just sitting with that emptiness and that confusion and not knowing where to go and what to do. That is part of the main characteristic of stage 4. We feel helpless. This is actually part of the integrity. To admit our confusion and just sit in it is honest and real, and it's a beautiful thing. The other thing about this is it's intensely personal, this part of the journey, and it's really hard to share, and it's hard to feel a sense of belonging. At this stage, you may feel like there's something wrong with you or wrong with your church community, or both, and you have no idea what to do about it. And that's very hard to talk about. To be honest, I have actually spent almost 20 years of my adult life at this stage. I can speak to it out of a lot of experience. And I have to say that when you're in the midst of this, you kind of feel like hiding from the active outward ministries of the church. I felt like I could no longer serve like I had at stage 3 with the same sense of integrity. And I felt kind of frustrated and resistant to a lot of aspects of what the church was doing, and I just didn't know how much of that was me and how much of it was the church, but I was constantly battling it out with God, just constantly. And I have to say, sometimes at some churches, the leaders themselves have not made it to stage 4 or through stage 4, and so they're not necessarily they're not equipped necessarily to help. And so sometimes at this stage, people have to go to spiritual direction or some other specific spiritual guidance that's equipped to help with this stage. I actually gravitated towards First Pres about 14 years ago, I think because I was in this phase, and there was something about, compared to my previous churches, there was something about being here that made me feel safer. There used to be a very casual service, many of you will remember this, at Sunday evenings, we called it the 5:05. It happened at literally 5:05 p.m. Very casual, and I didn't feel a lot of pressure, a lot of people watching me. And I literally would sit in the service every week. I wanted to be there, but I didn't know how I felt about all of it. And I would sit in the back and cry. I would literally just be grappling with God. I felt God's presence, but I also was confused, and I would just need to be working through it. And being in church in that place made me feel safe. And I felt like nobody was going to call me on it here, which is part of the reason I think I gravitated to First Pres. In general, when I was in that phase, I just felt very incapable of engaging in ministry, but I actually was afraid to teach because I felt like I didn't want to stick my neck out, right? I didn't want to teach and then have something that was not doctrinaire come out and then all the pitchforks would come out, right? I was really afraid that I would say something wrong because I was still working these things through. But actually at First Pres, I was able to find some places where I could quietly serve in the background. I actually did the blab, which is when you project the slides for a couple years. That was don't have to do any teaching there. I can just be helpful quietly. That was good. And I helped with some of the women's retreat planning. So I just felt that was actually this was a place where I could be in that. But I know that one of the reasons that the ministers here, the Christian formation task force wants to bring stages of faith in. I think they're drawn to this partly because they know that this is a legitimate and powerful and important part of all of our faith journeys, and they want to make more space for that here at First Pres. I've heard again and again that people are saying, no one needs to walk alone. No one needs to walk alone through any of these phases, especially this one that's so hard. So I think that's one thing that I want to hold on to, being here. So this is often a time when a personal crisis sort of kicks us into this place. We don't choose to go there, but it happens to us. Something horrible happens, you can't reconcile it with your stage 3 belief system. Your faith doesn't seem to work anymore, the foundation seems to crumble. You lose the certainties, and you start to search for more direction instead of answers. God is released from the box. We can do another slide here. God is released from the box. He's not what we thought, but he's much more available personally. And this is important. It looks like, even to us sometimes, like we've lost our faith. What seemed clear and obvious before is not. We're challenging those same things we used to espouse. Others accuse us of being weak or wrong or giving in, being misguided, selling out. And I want to show a little diagram here. So one thing that helps us understand this is actually looking at the differences between stage 2 and 3 and stage 4. So in stage 2 and 3, there's a very strong horizontal element. Our connection with others, our connection with our community, doing what others are expecting of us is a strong component, but the inward relationship between ourselves and God is a little bit less developed at that point. And yet in stage 4, it flips. The lateral connection with our community gets weakened by all the things I've just described, but our relationship between self and God takes on this extra intensity. And stage 4 are often called vertical people because of this, because they're just vertically oriented to God. But as we've learned, the phases tend to recapitulate each other or themselves. So stage 2 people are actually, when we talk about misunderstandings among the types. If you think about what stage 2 is, stage 2 people were just earlier in stage 1. And in stage 1, you don't know the answers and you're searching and you're not sure if there are any answers. And then they move into stage 2 and they're like, look, answers, this is great. This makes me feel so much better. So now you can imagine how a stage 2 person might look at a stage 4 person. That stage 4 person is asking questions. They don't have answers. And what does the stage 2 person want to do? They want to empathize and help. And they're going to say, come on, I've got some answers for you. Just do this and it'll be okay. And they're really genuinely trying to help and be compassionate. And yet it feels wrong to the 4. The 4 feels even more distant. The distance between themselves and that belief system, they experience it even more intensely. I have had this happen many, many times. I've been on the receiving end of this, and yet I totally see the effort in people to try to help me. It just is one of those tensions that we all have to live in community. So, all right. So we can be caged at stage 4 for a number of reasons. We can be stuck in questioning and never get to the point where we commit. We can be consumed by self-assessment. We can be immobilized and fail to lean on God. But I have to say, the main reason, the most common reason we get stuck at stage 4 is because there's no going to stage 5 unless we go through something called the wall. So Richard Rohr, yeah, this is good, it's okay. Richard Rohr said, Gerald May, he was quoting Gerald May, and he was talking about how Gerald May said that God has to work in the soul in secret and in darkness. Because if we fully knew what was happening and what mystery, transformation, God, grace will eventually ask of us, we would either try to take charge or stop the whole process. No one oversees his or her own demise willingly, even when it is the false self that is dying. God has to undo our illusions secretly, as it were, when we are not watching and not in perfect control, say the mystics. And this is where we're getting to the crux. This is why we enter stage 4, and this is why we don't have any control in stage 4. This is something God is deeply doing. Now, the wall is the name that these authors call this, but we get to the point where there is for lack of a better term, a showdown between our will and God's will. We've been sort of negotiating and kind of getting our way all along, and at this point, God says, your ways are not my ways, and we're going to do it my way. And you don't necessarily easily submit to that. So we get stuck. There are lots and lots of ways that we resist the wall. I'm not going to try to talk through all these because it is so far beyond what we can do today. Trust me, if understanding these things helped us get through it, I would have gotten through it 20 years ago when I started reading this book and studying it. It is such a personal experience, and we all need to get the guidance that we can from many, many sources. But go ahead and show, there are many types of resistance. There are also many experiences going through the wall. We have discomfort, we experience healing, we develop discernment. There are many, many things that happen, but again, it is a mysterious, beautiful process. So, moving from stage 4 to stage 5 requires going through the wall. And as that happens, we let go of our spiritual ego and our self-centeredness. We start to accept God's purpose for our lives. We seek wholeness through personal healing and pilgrimage. We become willing to commit to whatever it takes. We let go of the search for self and allow a new obedience. So now we get to talk about stage 5. I think this is a great picture for stage 5 because obviously this is a beautiful tree, right? It's showing colors, fall colors, and yet think about what that is. Those fall colors are in some ways the tree dying, parts of the tree dying, right? Those leaves are passing on as it's meant to be. And I like this particular picture because that tree is kind of lopsided, right? Like parts of it are, have fallen off already, parts are not. It's still beautiful, but it's very real. It's not what we would predict, it's just very specific to that tree. And I think that's really how I think about stage 5. It's a picture of authenticity to me, which is the superpower. So go ahead and new slide. So in this phase, we start to see that we have the same limitations we always had, but we see them differently. We start to believe in God's unconditional love. And I want to point out a difference between stage 4's kind of honesty, integrity, and stage 5's authenticity. Maybe you were wondering, what's the difference there? I think that at stage 4, you feel like there's something wrong with you and you want to hide. You are being deeply honest with yourself in radical ways, but you can only really let trusted others into that process to really see all the mess. Whereas in stage 5, you're aware you have the same limitations you always did. You have the same incomplete understanding, but suddenly you realize that is absolutely okay. And you don't feel the need to hide that anymore. You start to look around and you don't have insecurity around it. You realize it's okay to completely share your weaknesses. I think that at this phase, we realize that we are no worse than anyone else out there. We're also no better, but we might as well just be what we are. And it's inevitable that we're going to find out that we're not in control. We're going to find out that things we used to think we could control and manage, we can't. But we never were supposed to. And there's a new awareness of that ends up being paradoxically empowering. Go ahead and do the next slide. We get this sense that we might as well step out and do ministry. We don't have to be perfect to do that ministry. We might as well be present. And we actually step out and engage with the world right out of our limitations, right out of our weaknesses, in our own specificity, in a completely new way. It looks a lot like stage 3 on the outside, but the internal experience of it, very different. Because it's like, well, could fail here, that's okay. I failed yesterday, I'm going to fail again tomorrow. Today I might do okay, it's okay. One of the things that happens is you start to get your sense of calling and vocation in ministry more directly from God, and you engage in ministry without ego. You're really just along for the ride. You're serving a function here today, and then tomorrow you might not be serving that function, and it's fine. And so at stage 5, it's just a very different feel. Go ahead and another slide. So we become much more concerned and focused on other people's best interests than our own. We go out of our way to sacrifice. And the other thing about this is we don't burn out at this stage. We really are just responding to the internal rhythms of grace. And there is a deep calm or stillness that comes with this. We actually long to be quiet. Even when we're busy, we're trying to be quiet and listen. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say this in front of all you people, but it's this exact characteristic that helped me realize that I actually, in the last year or two, I'm starting to become part of stage 5. Now, I have to say, I'm one personal crisis away from going back behind the wall, and that can happen. So right now I feel like the last year or two is a whole different thing, but who knows what happens. But I just want to say that my whole life I would wake up every morning and I would look at the things I needed to do, and even if I felt competent to do them, I would still feel this sense of, oh, I have to do this. And I would feel kind of overwhelmed. I would feel inadequate. I would struggle and have dread. I always was trying to do everything with my ego, and I still felt like I needed to make it happen on some level, whether it was service to God or anything else. And now I wake up, and it's so different. It's night and day from what my life used to be. I wake up and I'm just like, I don't know what's going to happen. I have no idea how today is going to go. I know what's on my schedule, but I'm sure that's not what's really going to happen. I don't know what divine appointments God is going to bring me. I don't know what kind of misadventures are going to happen. I could get a terrible phone call today. Something horrible could happen. What's it going to be? I'm curious. I have this sense of feeling like God's narrative is so present to me. He's making a story in my life. And every day, I'm like, what's the next page going to be? What's going to happen today? And I know there are going to be some bad plot twists and some good ones. I'm going to fall on my face. I'm going to do surprisingly well at something. And that's part of the fun. And so now I have a much deeper sense of peace. And part of it, as you can tell, is because I struggled about my ego for 20 years with God. And now I'm finally at the point where I can sort of start to get the sense for what it's like to live without so much of that. And it is life-changing. And so, like I said, for now, I'm saying this today, we'll see where I am in a year, because we can always go backwards. But that's where I am, and I feel like it's a beautiful place to be. And it's also something that is a little less useful to other people. So one of the things that is funny about the cages is these cages aren't really cages anymore. You don't really get stuck at stage 5 in a bad, unhealthy way. You just look like you're behaving unhealthy to other people. So in this stage, you may kind of be out of touch with practical concerns or doctrine. Like maybe I just don't want to, somebody who's at stage 5 doesn't necessarily want to engage in doctrinal discussions or worrying about certain aspects of church life that others might find very important. This is sometimes okay. And they're apparently careless about important things. They already are starting to, and I'm only very much starting this. I don't know a lot of this yet, but starting to care less about things that others find important. So a word of warning here, this is not contained just within your church life. When you start to experience this, this permeates everything, including your professional life. If you experience this, you go to work and maybe the things that used to be important to you or important to your boss are not important anymore. And you're going to be making choices out of an internal direction that is not necessarily what fits in your work environment. It is disruptive, but it can be really transformative to be more and more responsive to this. So transition involves, it's gentle. It's just an evolution. You're not really trying and striving. It just starts to happen that going from stage 5 to 6, you see God everywhere. So let's talk about stage 6. Now this is a beautiful tree. I love this because to me it sort of symbolizes that the tree is expressing its full, unique individual nature. It's probably been through some forest fires, it's got some moss growing there, and lots of animals are probably living in it or on it. Its root system is nourishing junior trees around it. I just think it's fully established and solid, and it's of great benefit to the world just by being. And I think that the reason go ahead and the next slide, I think that the reason that they even have a stage 6 in this theory is so that we can have a place for the true super gurus among us. I think honestly, I doubt there are many people in this room who are at this stage. I don't know and many of us never get there, but I think all of us probably can think of somebody that we know who is at this stage. And I think we've encountered somebody like that, and it's stuck with us. These people are so present spiritually. They're doing things that are so incomprehensible to us. They move with a rhythm that we can't understand, but we know there's something very important and powerful about that. And when we come in contact with them, we're changed. So there's a powerful effect there, and it's very hard to describe, and I can't do it justice. I don't know even how. What the book says, total surrender is the superpower. Moment to moment to moment, what God is doing is what's happening, and that's why they seem incomprehensible to many of us. Wisdom is gained through life struggles. They're living so deeply, compassionately, and generously and self-sacrificially that we just think it's crazy. Next slide. They become detached from things and from stress. Being a millionaire or being on the street is equivalent because it's whatever God called you to do, and it doesn't matter. Life is abandoned. Now, go ahead to the next slide. Again, people appear to be caged here because they just seem like they're neglecting themselves sometimes, or they're neglecting important things, or leaving things aside, living too simply. But this is just what God happens to be doing in their lives, and in a lot of ways, it's beautiful. They appear to be wasting their life. Maybe they're not doing anything, but it's between them and God. They're clearly being responsive and surrendering to whatever God has for them. So I didn't leave as much time as I wanted for this, but I think what I'd like to do now is I want to give us a little bit of time to do some discussion at our tables. And I want to set a little bit of guidance on this. We're going to have about 10 minutes to talk. And we're not asking you to try to unpack where your spiritual life is, what stage you think you're at, or figure it out. That's way beyond what we can kind of get done in the room together. But I want you to be, go ahead with the next slide. I want you, I forgot. I had a nice stage 6. Saint Hildegard of Bingen recognized that the human person is a microcosm with a natural affinity for or resonance with its macrocosm, or God. She often used the word viriditas, the greening of things from within, recognizing a readiness in plants to receive the sun and to transform it into energy and life. This energy is the soul and seed of everything, an inner voice calling you to become who you are, become all that you are. The inner shows itself in the outer, and the outer reflects the inner. The individual reflects the cosmos reflects the individual. This is a beautiful picture of stage 6. So what I'd like us to do is I'd like us to actually talk at our tables. You can do the next slide. And think about these two questions. And not everyone needs to speak. You certainly don't need to cover both questions, but be thinking about how can understanding the stages of faith help me to treat someone in my life with greater empathy? And how might First Pres Berkeley use the stages of faith teaching to become a more inclusive, empathic, and spiritually vibrant church? So go ahead and talk amongst yourselves. Okay, everyone. I hate to interrupt these conversations, but we're running out of time, and I want to give us a chance to close. All right. Well, so I think if there's anything that I've said in the last 2 weeks that I want you to hear, one piece of it is that God is the one doing this. God leads us from place to place, and God does not really like straight lines in this sort of environment. I think we've all kind of bounced around if we look at our histories, and we have to recognize that that is actually exactly right. That's the narrative that God has for us, and we have to respect that narrative in the people around us as well. And I hope and pray that as a church, we can start to explore that. Today was just the beginning, and I think that as a church together, we can explore these things and understand these things in different ways. And I hope and pray that we will all see God in a little bit of a new way in each other and in ourselves and in our community. And I want to give Michelle a chance to come up and give us a close.
Can you join me in thanking Kate? We are just so very grateful for the ways that Kate has made her gifts and your journey in particular so accessible to us. What a divine providence that we are entering into this journey as a church and that Kate is able to be one of our guides along the way. We really hope to echo Kate's hopes. Our hope as a task force is that today maybe you found some language that helps articulate your own experience. I know that was many of our experiences on the task force, that as we read through these stages, we had those moments of, oh, that's right, that's me. And we hope that there was an element of that for you today, that you can begin to know that you are not alone, but that there are others on the journey with you, and that we as a church are committed to journeying with you and supporting you. And that this can open us up to empathically walk alongside one another. We hope that wherever you are, you hear today that you are not alone, that God is present and at work in your life, and that we are here with you. And we also hope that you hear that this is just the beginning. I feel like this is whetting some of our appetite, and yet there's so much exploring to do with this. And so we are committed as a task force to going deeper in our understanding of the stages of faith and what that might look like for us as individuals and as a community. And so I want to invite the task force to stand up. If you are on that committee that thought through what is this inward, outward, together journey, these are the folks who are committed to continuing this work and thinking through what this might look like for us. And if you had some really wonderful conversations around your table, particularly about that second question, about how might this change how we engage one another at First Pres, I encourage you to come and talk with one of these folks so that we can take some of those learnings with us as we move forward. And thank you each for your work in helping get us to this point. So there are some upcoming opportunities for us to continue this journey together. First, the audio and slides for both last week's presentation and this week's will be online by early this coming week, by Tuesday, and we have videoed both sessions as well, so you can access those in the coming week or so on the First Pres website. Next week as well, Kate has generously made herself available for an informal Q&A during the middle hour. If you're sitting with this and are really engaged and want to learn a little bit more, have some questions that you'd love addressed, Kate would love to spend some time with you. That will be during the middle hour in G208. So come and join us then. Finally, we are committed to continuing this work together. And so if you are in leadership in our Christian formation department, know that there's going to be some opportunities coming in the next few months where we can really think about what does this look like for us in community? How might familiarity with the stages of faith actually equip us to walk alongside one another more fully? So be aware that opportunities are coming. As we go from this place with such a rich feeding of our souls, would you join me in a closing prayer? God of grace, we thank you that you are the divine gardener, that you nurture our souls, that you help us grow, that you sink our roots deep in you, and you help our branches reach out widely to your world and your people. God, we thank you for this beautiful invitation to think about the ways that you grow us and the different seasons of growth. God, we pray that you would use these seeds planted today to bring verdant growth in our community, that we might grow deeper in you and more fully together as a community. Thank you for Kate, for her wisdom, for her journey, for her deep-rootedness in you, and for sharing the fruits of that growth with us. We pray that you would bless us, send us out from this place refreshed to come back together again and grow even more deeply in you. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. Go in peace.